Chapter 5, the assessment phase of case management. The process of case management usually begins when an individual in need seeks help from another source. Often, the individual will use informal resources first, such as friends, family, parents, or children. When someone decides help is advantageous, he or she may get in touch with a human service agency. Case management may also begin if an individual is already involved with another human service agency and he or she has needs that go beyond the provisions of that agency. In this case, the person is referred to a new agency. A potential client becomes an applicant when they seek services from an agency. A client is an individual who meets the eligibility criteria to be accepted for services. The interview is usually the first contact between a helper and an applicant. Typically, an intake interview will happen as soon as possible after a referral. The interview provides an opportunity for the case manager and applicant to get to know each other, to define the applicant's need or problem, and give structure to the helping relationship. It's important for helpers to have strong interviewing skills, listening, interpreting, and asking questions. Interviewing serves as the critical tool for our communication with clients for collecting information, determining eligibility, and developing and implementing service plans. We want to help clients explore their situations, increase their understanding of it, and identify clients' resources and strengths. 3 main outcomes should come from the initial interview. The first is rapport. The case manager should establish an atmosphere of understanding and comfort. Second is that the client feels understood and accepted during the interview. Last, the client has the opportunity during the initial interview to discuss concerns and goals. Interviewing is the process by which we gather information, help clients solve problems, and provide information or advice. An interview can be conducted by a wide variety of helping professionals. It's a responsibility most case managers will take on. Interviews can occur once or may happen repeatedly over long or short periods of time. Some helpers use the word interview only in reference to the first meeting, preferring to use the word session to describe subsequent meetings. The length of an initial meeting or interview depends on several factors, such as the structure of the agency, the comprehensiveness of the services, the number of people who are applying for services, an individual or family, as well as the amount of information needed to determine eligibility. All interviews share some commonalities. First, communication between 2 participants is established and information is shared between them. Second, the case manager and applicant are interdependent and influence each other. Both come into the interaction with attitudes, values, beliefs, and experiences. The applicant brings the problem that is causing distress. The case manager has knowledge and skills of helping. Finally, the interviewing skill of the case manager brings control to the interaction, sets the tone, and establishes a positive environment. An interview has a structure consisting of 3 parts. The beginning is the time to establish common understanding, greeting the client, establishing focus, clarifying roles, and exploring presenting problems. It's also a time to answer any questions the applicant may have about the agency, its services, and policies. The middle of the interview involves developing the focus of the relationship between the case manager and the applicant. Assessment, planning, and implementation are expected during this time. The end of the interview process provides an opportunity to summarize what has occurred during the initial meeting. This brings the interview to closure. Closure may involve the client deciding not to continue with the application for services, or the applicant may decide to move forward with the application and services. Or there might not be enough information for the client or case manager to decide whether to continue with the process. More information may be necessary to make that determination. There are 2 main types of interviews that a case manager may use: structured and unstructured. A structured interview is directive and focused. It's usually guided by a form or a specific set of questions that's used to gather certain information. If a case manager completes an intake form with the client during the interview is likely to be structured. 2 types of structured interviews are the intake interview and the mental status exam. In both cases, specific questions will be asked to direct the information obtained during the interview. An unstructured interview is typically broad and unrestricted. It can be used to establish rapport and elicit more detailed information, and likely will include communication skills such as reflection of feeling, paraphrasing, and more. Confidentiality must be addressed with clients during the initial interview. Confidentiality is communication that is held in confidence or trust. Assuring clients of confidentiality helps to build the trust that's necessary for them to share information with us. Generally, information may be shared about clients within agencies such as with supervisors, consultants, or other staff who are working with the applicant. The client must sign a release of information if his or her information will be shared with other agencies or organizations. It can be difficult in large agencies to limit access to information only to authorized staff, so case managers must ensure that records are secure and that conversations are confidential. Another problem regarding confidentiality can arise surrounding privileged communication. Privileged communication is a legal concept that determines whether communication between clients and professionals can be used in court without client consent. Human service professionals may not be protected under privileged communication, so it is possible, depending on state laws, that a case manager might have to provide information or testify in court. Clients must have that understanding before they begin sharing information. During this phase, the case manager gathers and assesses information. From here, the process narrows to identifying the problem and determining eligibility for services. The case manager must consider the following questions as part of assessment. Is the client eligible for services? What problems are identified? Are services or resources available that relate to the problem identified? Will the agency's involvement help the client reach the objectives and goals that have been established? What types of services might be needed to meet unique aspects of the client, family, or issues? As the case manager reviews information that has been gathered, she or he considers any initial impressions with regard to defining the problem, how serious it is, its intensity, frequency, and duration. The case manager considers this in conjunction with the application for services, case notes summarizing the initial contact with the applicant, and any notes that report subsequent contacts. From here, the case manager learns more about the applicant's reasons for applying for services, the applicant's background, strengths and weaknesses, the problem that's causing difficulty, and what the applicant wants to have happen as a result of services. The case manager also ensures that all necessary forms and releases have been completed and signed. Each piece of information the case manager has gathered becomes like a piece of the puzzle. As the pieces are revealed and placed in the file, the picture of the applicant and the problem becomes clearer and more complete. When assessing a client, 2 questions guide the process. Is there sufficient information to establish the eligibility? The case manager has to make sure that all relevant information is provided to meet the eligibility criteria. Second, is additional information necessary? If the answer is no, the case manager and client can move on to the next phase of case management. But if the answer is yes, then a decision has to be made about what additional information is needed and how to obtain it. During case assignment, the applicant becomes a client who is then assigned to a case manager to coordinate services. Frequently, the case manager is the same person who conducted the intake interview and determined eligibility. But there are other possible case assignment scenarios. A specialized worker may have level specialization or task specialization. Level specialization involves the complexity and orientation of the client and the presenting problem. Task specialization focuses on the functions needed to facilitate problem resolution. The other scenario for case assignment involves a team of professionals who work together to provide services to a client. This scenario is most likely in institutional settings in which multiple professionals provide specific services to clients. Throughout the assessment phase of case management, documentation and report writing are critical. Different agencies may require different forms of documentation, but typically during the assessment phase, it includes intake summaries and staff notes. One type of documentation is called process recording. This is a narrative telling of an interaction with another individual. It shows what each participant has said by giving an accurate account of a verbal exchange, a factual description of any action or nonverbal behavior, and the interview's analysis and observations. The goal is accuracy and impartiality. In process recording, identifying information such as names, date, location, and purpose of the interview will be included, as well observations of the physical and emotional climate, activity occurring during the interaction, and the client's nonverbal behavior. In addition, it includes a content account, what was said by each participant, as well as the recorder's feelings and reactions and impressions. The other style of recording is called summary recording. This is a condensed version of what happened during the meeting that presents an organized presentation of facts. An intake summary or staff notes are examples of summary recording. A summary recording gives a concise presentation of the interview content rather than an extensive or detailed account of what was said. The focus remains on the client, excluding the case manager's feelings about what transpired. It will contain a summary section and is organized by topic rather than chronologically. Summary recordings are less time-consuming to write and are easier to read. For these reasons, most agencies prefer summary recordings. They also use less paper and can be easily stored and retrieved electronically as well. An intake summary is generally written during the assessment phase after the agency's first contact with an applicant. In some instances, it may be written at the end of the assessment phase. Intake summaries usually include information about the applicant, the presenting problem, a summary of his or her background and social history, the case manager's diagnostic impressions, and treatment recommendations. All of this information is organized to determine the client's eligibility for services, which problems were identified, whether services or resources are available that relate to the problem, and whether the agency's involvement improved the situation for the applicant. An example of an intake summary is provided on page 163 of the text. Staff notes or case notes are also important documentation during assessment. These notes are written after each interaction between the applicant and the professional and are filed chronologically in the client's chart. The format for staff notes varies depending on the agency guidelines. They confirm a specific service, connect a service to a key issue, record the client's response, describe the client's status, and provide direction for ongoing treatment. The text introduces us to the SOAP case note format, which is an acronym for Subjective, Objective, Assessment, and Plan. The benefit of using this format is that it helps improve communication among professionals. It supports the identification, prioritization, and tracking of client problems so they receive attention in a timely way. Subjective and objective are both parts of data collection, with subjective referring to information about the problem for the client's perspective or that of other people. The case manager's observations and external written materials are the objective component. Assessment includes both the subjective and objective information for interpretation. And the last section is the plan that includes both the action, such as a follow-up appointment and prognosis. Several examples of SOAP case notes are presented on pages 166 and 167 of the text.